Story 1. The girl who pushed open the shop door, was too young for the cane she leaned on. I examined her from under the brim of my dark baker's boy cap. I sat in my tall swivel chair behind the counter, feet kicked up next to the register. Two knitting needles clicked in my lap, the motion so mechanical I never looked down. They manipulated the strand of yarn into a nearly completed scarf. The little ball danced on the ground as I pulled from it. "Morning," I said. The girl flashed me a smile. "Good morning." She was polite and didn't stare or even give a second glance to my eye patch, partially hidden under the brim of my cap. Since I had turned, I had never felt bad about taking what I needed. But this girl seemed oddly bright, naive even. What a waste. I couldn't wait any longer, though, my good, I never left her as she limped through the store. It wasn't hard. The shop was more of a nook than anything, and the bright and airy front windows did nothing to make the shelves seem less crowded. They were looming and solid, full of open front cubbies that displayed neatly stacked skeins of yarn. I had sorted them by weight and by color, careful to tuck all the loose ends away. I glanced down for a moment to finish off the scarf, looping it around my neck once it was free from the needles. When I surveyed my shop again, I saw that the girl had knocked a skein to the ground. She perused a nearby cubby, unaware. Spots danced in front of my eye. For a moment I expected to feel the accelerated pounding of my heart as well, but then I remembered. "You dropped one," I said, my voice stiff. "What was that?" I gestured toward the rogue skein. "You dropped one." "Oh," the girl said, smiling, and replaced the yarn. She had to stoop down awkwardly, keeping her weight off her bad leg. Only once everything was back in order did I breathe deeply, feeling the passageways in my mind open back up like undammed rivers. I adjusted my baker's book cap. "How long have you been knitting?" I asked, leaning my elbows on the counter. "Ever since I got hurt." She thumped her cane to emphasize her bad leg. "I couldn't walk at all for a while, and I needed to keep busy." "What happened?" "Car accident," she said simply. Her eyes met mine, and I felt the emptiness under my eye patch. "We have a knitting group here sometimes," I offered, struggling to keep the pushiness out of my voice. It crept in anyway. "We could use some new members." "I'm all set. Thanks, though you don't even have to come," I said with a charming smile. "Just sign up and you get a free skein of yarn. All I need is your name and an email address." I could see her resolve breaking. "Preferably one you use. But hey, I'm not picky." "Fine. But only because I need this." She held up a skein of expensive alpaca yarn and smiled again. "Sign-up sheets in the back." I slid out of my tall chair before she could change her mind. I led her into the only other room in the shop, my windowless office that was no larger than a bread box. The fluorescent light flickered slightly. The desk was small and shoved into the corner, covered in neat stacks of paper. The faint smell of cleaning product hung in the air, and not a single mote of dust could be found. I produced a sign-up sheet from one of the perfect stacks of paper. "This is cozy," the girl said as she filled out her name and email. "It's really a supply closet." I closed the door and stood behind her. The cane leaned against my desk. I unwound the scarf from my neck and gripped an end in each hand. "Sorry about this," I said flatly, and looped the scarf around her neck, pulling it tight and cutting off her windpipe. She struggled, but her bad leg gave out and we both fell to the floor, crashing against the closed door on the way down. Her hands clawed at mine, but she grew weaker and was still. After a few minutes, I loosened the scarf from her neck and wrapped it back around mine. That was easier than last time. The girl slumped forward, her hair spilled into her now puffy face. I pushed her onto her back and yanked my eye patch down around my neck, exposing my raw, empty eye socket. Mechanically, I pulled the girl's right eyelids wide open with one hand, and with the other I scooped my fingers under her eye, popping it out with a sickening squelch. I didn't flinch. Once upon a time I might have, but not now. Tendons popped as I freed it completely from the dead girl's distorted face. Careful not to drop it, I pressed the organ into my own waiting eye socket, squeezing my lids shut over the foreign object. Warmth slowly radiated out from the new eye back into my face and head as my body adapted. I blinked rapidly, but my sight didn't return immediately, so I repositioned the eye patch once again. I walked out the front door of the shop, not bothering to lock up. I wouldn't be back here. Dismayed, I saw that the girl had left shallow scratch marks running up both of my forearms. Those would need to be replaced, too. Then, just when I thought I was done for a while, I adjusted the baker's bow cap, pulling it lower over my eyes to block out the beams of sun that flickered between the low square buildings that populated the outskirts of the city. My legs were new enough that I walked normally, without the shuffling that usually plagued others like me. I was grateful to still look human. The warmth in my new eye grew more intense. I whistled as I walked down the sidewalk, eventually pulling off the eye patch and dropping it into the gutter, my eyesight restored. Back at the shop, I knew the girl would be stirring now. Story 2. Good morning, Daddy. This all started with simple, little events. They were the kind of things that you questioned for a moment and let pass without too much thought. I'll start from the beginning. It was a warm Saturday morning in spring. Saturdays were always early days for me, since my daughter loved to wake up early for cartoons and cereal. Seeing as she was only 5, it wasn't surprising that she couldn't fully appreciate sleeping in on the weekends. At first, this Saturday was no different from the rest. Kaya came into my room, kissed me on the cheek, and woke me up with a pleasant, "Good morning, Daddy." I stirred a bit and told her to go ahead and get Doc, our dog, some food while I got up. My wife had already left for school, so there was no one save Kaya to keep me from drifting back into a light sleep. When I woke again, I left the bedroom and went to the living room to check on Kaya, since she'd been waiting for me to get her breakfast. When I got there, though, the television was not on, the dog had no food, and Kaya was nowhere to be found. I checked her room, thinking she may have gone back to play with her toys while she waited for me. But when I opened her door, I found her asleep in her bed. This was odd, as she never goes back to bed in the mornings. But I shrugged it off and got her out of bed for breakfast and cartoons. She opened her eyes, smiling, and said, "Good morning, Daddy." The rest of the day passed with no trouble. The next weekend, everything was normal. Kaya did not go back to bed after waking me up, and we spent the morning watching cartoons. The normalcy was short-lived, though. That afternoon, I was in the driveway working on my car, while Kaya read in her room. I had the car up on a jack and was pulling the oil pan when I heard little feet run by. At first I smiled. Kaya was always curious about anything I was doing. I could hear Doc barking from the window which was the first alarm as he was generally a quiet dog. Then I watched as Kaya's little pink Converse ran up to the side of the car, stood still for a moment, then reared back and slammed the jack out from underneath. I pulled myself from underneath the car, but Kaya was nowhere to be found. I was furious. I stormed inside. Doc was still barking at the window, running around. Frantically, I flung open Kaya's door and began to yell, "What the hell do you think you were doing? You could have killed me. You're done for the day. Do not leave this room." Understood. She set down her book and gave me a puzzled look. "Daddy, I haven't left my room at all." I didn't care to listen to her, but thinking back now, I wish I had. I wish I hadn't been too furious to think about the Converse, the laces, and the fact that she was not wearing them when I burst into her room. I explained everything to my wife that night. Since I wasn't badly injured, she convinced me to chalk it up to a curious little girl's accident. The daylight was almost gone, and we decided to go out for dinner. Kaya couldn't find her Converse anywhere, not on the shoe rack, in the living room, or on the porch. After a bit of looking, we found them neatly placed and untied in her closet. This was another thing I wish I had put some more thought into. Now, before I bring you up to speed, let me explain a few things. Kaya, though smarter than the average 5-year-old, was easily frustrated with learning new things, the most important of these being tying her shoes. She hadn't figured the whole process out yet, and with that came untying her shoes. She usually just pulled them off and left the laces tied up. Another piece I wish I had taken into more consideration was Kaya's fascination with mirrors and her recent ramblings about her imaginary friend. She would go on about how her friend thought that she was so pretty and wanted to be just like her. Back on topic now. The next few months went by without any major issues. A few more oddities, like Kaya's shoes going missing for a day, or thinking I saw Kaya on her bed reading during the week, when I knew that during the week she was with her mother. A few mornings I woke up to knives out of place, the back door wide open, or the gas stove left on, but disregarded these things as the wife's forgetfulness on her way out to school. Now to explain how we got here to this point with me locked inside my bedroom. This weekend, Kaya's mother asked to keep her for some family Christmas parties, which I agreed to since Kaya does not have much family on my side to visit. I took advantage of this to get some extra sleep in. As I was lying in bed, half awake, half asleep, I could faintly hear Doc barking in the kitchen. The bedroom door opened slowly with a muffled creak, and little footsteps walked towards my side of the bed. I kept my eyes closed and tried to convince myself it was just Doc coming in to remind me he needed food. I felt a small kiss on my cheek. I couldn't move. I opened my eyes, and there was Kaya smiling down at me. "Good morning, Daddy." I gave the thing a forced half-smile and asked her to wait in the living room. I think it's aware that I know. I can see the wife's car still in the driveway, and it started clawing at the door. Doc has stopped barking, and I fear the blood running under the door is his. The clawing, the giggling, those damn shoes. The clawing stopped, and a soft, quiet whisper comes from behind me. "Good morning, Daddy." Story 3. The Cinematographer. The paranormal was something that the three of us felt we were beyond. We all liked to think of ourselves as educated, and when we got into arguments we felt near invincible. But when Martin insisted we fuck around with his fat older brother's laptop full of occult pictures and docks, and when he promised to involve some of his best weed, the three of us decided to meet up in John's basement, hallowed smoking ground. After a couple bowls, the three of us stared into the glow of the HP screen, clicking through folders labeled Demons, Rituals Life, Ritual Strength, Hexes, Phasing, Lucid Dreaming. Every folder was full of sketchy Polaroid pictures of pale figures with twisted triangular faces and fingers like twigs, long pieces of text containing foreign languages and symbols, and intricate diagrams for sigils and sacrifices. It was some mind-bending shit for stone 17-year-olds. We found a project in a folder labeled Summoning. It contained tons of pictures and diagrams for calling things to this world. From hell, from other dimensions, from something that one image referred to as the else. And we picked one at random to mess around with and laugh through. The diagram called for little prep. We needed only light some incense and say some incantations, all in some language that none of us had heard of. The entity that the diagram described lived in some place referred to as over the wall, and tons of red text littered the picture. It all warned of dealing with the entity, of its numerous powers, and it included short accounts of the lives it had ruined, including a pretty sick one about a woman whose guts it had removed and played with, and a few more involving figures without eyes found wandering the scene of the summoning. The thing was a curious being, but impatient. It liked stalking us humans, watching, observing, before it grew more malicious, started taking us, experimenting on us, driving us to do things for it, seeing what made us squeal or cry or bleed. We got everything set up, and John volunteered to read off of the screen. Let me tell you, watching John fumble through that booga booga language was the highlight of the night. We laughed through the whole thing, John tripping over words and destroying some through his own chuckles. Even when Martin put up hands to settle us down, the snickers would get through and flare back into laughs. I decided to pull out my camera then. It had become tradition to film these basement sessions, and it seemed John was going for an Academy Award. We sort of gave up with the laptop after the camera came out. We were getting bored, and John ran out of words to read. Eventually, we all started passing the camera around and speaking into it directly, kind of doing the 70s show round table thing. We'd say something intelligent, revelatory, or funny, and then pass the camera on. It was a way of documenting some indispensable hilarity to look back on the next day. The night passed quick. I remember turning on the TV, and at some point Martin and I packed up the laptop and walked back to his house so John could pass out on his couch. But events leaked in and out of memory after the night in question. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone full of unread texts and missed calls, all from John. The gist of the messages was "Get your ass over here," and the voice delivering the voicemails wasn't that of the easy stoner I was used to dealing with. He spoke in unconnected, short clips, a lopsided train of thought. Found it downstairs for fun, you know, supposed to just. Thought I found it in the camera. To see, you need to see, supposed to be fun. Just over here. Get over here, please. John sounded completely stern, almost lifeless, something that set a million little alarm bells off in my head. I went to find Martin, who had also gotten a phone full of messages and we returned to John's house. We found him upstairs in the TV room. He'd hooked up my camera, left over from last night, and was watching the new stuff we'd recorded, pausing and fast-forwarding, stopping every now and then to watch. Martin and I crept into the room and took places quietly on the couch. We didn't want to interrupt. The footage played on about as I'd remembered it happening, and I watched as the John on screen recited the incantations. Coming from his mouth they sounded entirely made up, yet rhythmic, like poems from some other country. In the video we'd been cracking up, and the sound of chucked laughs and giggles bounced around the room. But watching it again made me feel weird, like I was seeing and hearing something I shouldn't be. Almost like snuff. I looked at Martin and then to John. John's stone face, Martin's mouth slightly agape, and the feeling that I was watching something forbidden made me feel like it had been a mistake to record last night. I finally asked John what was up, why he called us, why he seemed so somber, and he gave a cold answer, a knowing answer. Keep watching. So we did. The night on the tape played out, filing in memory gaps here and there as it played. It ran to the point where we started talking into the camera and passing it around. John looked as though he'd snap on either of us at any moment, so I didn't dare ask what we were looking for. Finally, in the video, I passed off the camera and John hit pause, see, well, John alternated a stare, almost accusingly, between where Martin and I were watching and the TV screen itself. I glanced at Martin, and he shook his head. On the screen we were all sitting together on John's couch, throwing up rock and roll devil horns with our hands stoned out of our minds. I stared at the image for a few fruitless seconds, but then it hit me like a train. I saw what John called us over to see, and it made me feel nauseous. John said it before I could. Who the fuck is holding the camera? Story 4. Did Boy Kill? This is part 1 of the Did Boy Kill series. You can read the other installments in the linked tag. I had an incredibly interesting conversation today with someone I love deeply. I do not know what to make of it, but what I do know is that our foundation is cracked, whether he knows it or not. It was one of those conversations that make you question everything you think you know about everything. As I enjoyed a glass of wine after he and I had dinner, we sat across from each other on the floor in our living room when he started the following conversation. Did you know I used to live here many years ago? Did you now? I answered with a smirk, knowing I was about to hear some fantastical story. Yeah, I used to play with my son in the park across the street. He loved to swing on the tire rope hanging from that huge tree. So you had a son? Yep. He's a lot older now, but I saw him this morning for the first time in a very long time, right there in that park. I don't remember seeing you talk to anyone. You must have been talking to your neighbor friend. I would have let you say hi, but he's still very angry with me. Why would your son be angry with you? You are the sweetest guy I know. Well, the last time I saw him, he had a knife to my throat. At this point, I sat up to reposition myself against the foot of the sofa. Honey, you had a son you never told me about, and the last time you saw him, he had a knife to your throat. I've seen you almost every day for the last 3 years, and you never mentioned this to me. I never thought I had to. But when I saw him today, it reminded me. Reminded you of what exactly? I curtly asked. Just that I saw him, and that the last time I did, we were here in this room. It was many years ago. Wait, you lived here many years ago. What do you mean? Yeah, many years ago, when I was older, me, Melvin Jr., and Lu Zhang lived here. Who is Lu Zhang? I questioned, starting to get a bit uncomfortable with each parley of the conversation. My wife from long ago, silly. I haven't seen her since I last saw my boy. Always wished I'd see her again. We actually met at the old creek right up Anderson Road. That creek had not been around for over 40 years. There is no way he would have known about it had he not lived here. Utterly baffled at that point, I pressed on with the talk since it was completely unexpected and compelling all the same. Where is she? Oh, I don't know. In heaven, I guess. I'm so sorry to hear that. She died? Well, yeah. Melvin Jr. cut her and she was breathing weirdly, but I couldn't wake her up. He cut her right there where you are sitting. My wine glass almost slipped out of my hand at the shock of the comment. It spilled slightly as I went to catch it, splattering across the white carpet. Looked a lot like that actually, he noted, unaffected. I hate to admit it, sweetie, but you are starting to scare me. Sorry, I wanted you to know. Since I saw him again today and all. He is just so angry. I don't know why he is so angry. Didn't know why back then either. Last thing he said today was that he was coming back here tomorrow night. Okay, you can stop making up this story now. It's not amusing anymore. You are really starting to scare me. It's okay. I am scared, too. I don't think he is coming to see you. He knows I am here, though, so he will probably come see me again. Seeing him with the knife was the last thing I remember before showing up here with you, Anne. Suddenly, we heard the front door handle begin to jiggle, and I let out a scream in panic. The door flung open, and my husband ran in, terrified. Sarah, what's wrong? Why were you screaming? My husband asked as he grabbed me to console me. Oh, thank God it was just you. Tim, you scared me half to death. As I sat up and tried wiping the rest of the wine off of my nightgown, my husband moved to the kitchen and grabbed some paper towels to assist me. I was having a very odd conversation with our Mr. Jr. here. He was telling me about how, in a previous life, he was married once and had a child here in this house many years ago. And he was also telling me how his son killed his wife with a knife. He even had a knife to his throat at one point. Oh, is that so, Junior? Tim asked half-heartedly, looking over to find Junior staring at the open front door with a blank, blinkless expression. But, Mom, he said he was coming tomorrow night. Junior mumbled, almost in a whisper, as he pointed to the front door. My neck whipped around so fast I thought it was going to rip right off my shoulders. As I peered into the door left open by Tim, I called out to Junior, exasperated but relieved. But, honey, there is no one there. Tim, shut the door, please. Quickly, please. As Tim reached the door, my 4-year-old son coldly spoke. He was standing behind Dad when he came in, and he's there now, Mom. He is looking right at you. Transfixed at the closing crack of the door, I saw nothing but the night in the distance, and yet I felt everything from tonight's conversation, relieved it's not tomorrow, but petrified that it will be. It's been several hours since my husband and son went to bed, unable to sleep. I decided to do some research. I found this article online. Did Bo kill? Like the Nimer family, I live on Staten Island, and tomorrow I think we are going to die. Story 5. Mess. I awoke with a start as I heard a loud bang out in the street. I hated noise before 8:30 a.m. I have OCD, so the tiniest things can set me off. Annoyed, I pulled on my bathrobe and walked out the front door to see what the commotion was. I stopped to fix a flower that was drooping to the wrong side. Immediately, I was assaulted with the world's imperfections. I gave a silent yell as I surveyed my block. It looked like a disaster zone. A house down the street was on fire, and people were running out of it, screaming. Overturned trash cans and makeshift sandbag barricades lined the sidewalk. I gave a small humph and turned on my heel back into my house, locking all for the bolts on my way in. I checked to make sure all my windows were boarded properly. Everything seemed okay. I moved over to the living room, grabbing the orange juice container and pouring myself a glass before I sat down on the sofa. I flipped on the television. The hum of the backup generator kicked up as power usage increased. For the fourth straight day, the state's emergency broadcast system was airing. I sighed and returned to the kitchen to make myself a piece of toast. I was tired of the broadcast. I was hoping they'd be back on schedule with the morning news soon. The governor has issued a state of emergency. This broadcast has been tailored to your area. A short pause. Residents of San Diego and Imperial counties are urged to make their way to the Red Cross centers in San Diego and El Centro. If you are unable to leave your home, lock and barricade your doors and windows. Arm yourselves with any weapons you can. Firearms are most effective, especially when aimed at the head. Remember to stay hydrated if infected. The CDC has so far been unsuccessful at finding a cure, but it is noted that staying hydrated keeps the immune system functioning properly. If an infected has already passed and returned in your household, do not hesitate to euthanize them. We repeat, do not hesitate. Remember, the Red Cross has centers in San Diego and El Centro. The military has camps throughout the state. Please stay safe. I recognized those closing words and switched off the TV to conserve power. Another loud bang could be heard outside. I jolted, alarmed at the noise. I swore under my breath. I straightened the sofa pillows as I stood up, making my way back to the front door. Another bang. Looking through the peephole, I saw a disgusting figure knocking its head into my front door. It was one of the zombies, with rotting gray skin and yellow eyes. There was a festering wound on its neck. Its dirty, blood-stained clothing accentuated its repulsiveness. Horrified, I stepped back. I had only seen the zombies on the television, never in real life. I wasn't sure what to do. Suddenly, a gunshot roared across the street, ripping into the zombie's skull. It fell immediately, its brain and blood all over my porch. I nearly fainted. So much mess. I heard a loud whoop, and then the rippling sound of a motorcycle engine. I realized that I wasn't safe in my home anymore, but with OCD, I found safety in what was familiar. The crowded, dirty city was not familiar. I knew it was foolish, and later I regretted it. But I chose to stay home. I could hear the zombies becoming restless outside later in the evening, wailing late into the night. A few times I heard screams as the living tried to escape. One sounded like Mrs. Avery from 2 houses down, another like Mr. King from around the corner. I vowed to try to escape while I still could the next day. With the thudding of zombies against my door, I fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, after gathering everything that would fit in my car and my Smith & Wesson, I backed out of my driveway for the last time. The air conditioning in the car cycled in the putrid stench of decay and vomit. The smell was overwhelming. I glanced around, trying to see if there was anyone nearby. Only zombies. They rushed over to my car, banging their bloody fists against my beautiful Lexus. One smeared entrails all over the window. I gave a small yelp and floored the gas pedal to get away. Minutes later, I was driving down the freeway. Overturned cars littered the road, with a few struggling bodies trapped in the wreckage. I hoped that those struggling were the undead. I passed a hospital with a large, crude banner, "Eating no help here, try mercy," written in black paint. I shuddered at the thought of hospital patients trapped in their beds as the undead came limping down the hallway. I was amazed that everything had gone to ruin so quickly. Pent up inside of my perfect house, I had no idea what the rest of humanity was facing out in the world. All of a sudden, a zombie came trundling out in front of my car. Noticing it, I instinctually swerved to avoid it, which proved to be a mistake. I slammed into the center divide at about 65 miles per hour, flipping a few times before coming to a stop upside down. My arm was twisted in a less than glorifying position, and I had multiple gashes and cuts from broken glass. Worst of all was the fact that I couldn't move my legs. I didn't know what was wrong. There was blood all over the place, gushing like a fountain. So much crimson, disgusting blood. I began to hyperventilate, and soon I was hysterical. "Help!" I screamed. "Oh, God, someone help me, please." Bad idea. The zombies, hearing my loud cries, began to migrate over to my car. Where I couldn't move my legs, where I was defenseless, I screamed more. I wildly attempted to get myself free, but I simply couldn't. Eventually, as the first zombies began to reach in through the window, I accepted my fate. Delirious with blood loss, I found myself with a childish grin. I felt dizzy as I said my last words. "Just don't make a mess." Story 6. The True Story of the Theater. Publisher's note: this story is a sequel to the anonymously authored creepypasta classic, The Theater. Before reading it, please read the original, which can be found here. Thank you. It's not something whispered about in certain circles. It's not something that comes in a plain-looking jewel case. It's not by a nameless and traceable developer, and it's certainly not supernatural. The game in question is indeed called The Theater, or before and was developed by a company called Salida Software. I'm fairly certain it's an English company, despite the Spanish name. As far as I know, all they made was learning software. I have a math suite from them somewhere around here, so the theater was probably meant to be some sort of edutainment game. The game was obviously never finished, probably from lack of funding or the whole company going under. The description in the story is actually pretty accurate. It's in a first-person perspective, with flat sprites in a 3D-ish environment, and glitchy as hell. The ticket taker has an egg-shaped body, and one of his hands is huge and misshapen. I think to look like he's reaching toward you for your ticket. The description of the swirly head man is also accurate, just a glitched version of the ticket taker. But I saw a few people saying that he looks like Gygas. That's not the case. The features of his face are just swirled and are red because his lips are gigantic. I have absolutely no idea why this happens, because while there are a few character sprites in the game's resources, that isn't one of them. Oh, and just to clarify, The sprite is a bit creepy, that's all. It's not terrifying. It's never filled me with a sense of dread. It's just a bit creepy. The game plays pretty much exactly as stated in the story, so accurately, in fact, that I think the author just downloaded it somewhere and decided to make a scary story of his experiences. I'll admit that some things in it can be unsettling, but not oh my god, crap your pants scary. Like I said, the game is unfinished and very glitchy. I think the idea is to select a movie from the posters on the wall, enter the theater, and play a mini-game. The mini-games are glitchy and to be dumped into the lobby. What's described in the story is what happens if you don't select a movie. You'll be allowed to enter the theater, but since the parameter of which game to load hasn't been set, you'll just be dumped back into the lobby. Here's where it gets a bit weird. If you continue to enter the theater without choosing a movie, odd, sometimes creepy things will happen. I'm not sure why, but if I were to make an educated guess, it would be that glitching past the mini games like this causes variables to reach values that they weren't meant to, resulting in things appearing where they shouldn't, or, the game is just glitched to hell and back. It's been years, but here are some of the effects I can remember. Story 7. Known only as it, the following is a true story, including the account of, first, my friend we'll refer to as Kasky, and my own. We were in basic training for the Navy, nearing the end of our stay there and moving on to the fleet. Soon enough, as you can imagine, people get really close in basic, so close that one night my friend, Kasky, decided to share his encounter with something he never gave a name to. Me, Kasky, and two others sat around our bunks after lights out, each of us sharing spooky stories we'd heard, joking along the way. Kasky remained silent the entire time, seemingly conflicted. He eventually worked up to telling us of his home in Indiana and a few minor scares he swore were true. We quickly moved back to our stories when he had stopped speaking, but he still seemed distant. We badgered him for a while until he finally caved and spoke of it. He said he never gave the entity a name, believing by attaching a name to it would give it power over him, and it would return if he would speak a name for it. As crazy as it sounded to me at the time, it seems he had some grounds on what he said, but we'll get to that later. Kasky was only 8 at the. Even as he spoke of it, he grew pale, his eyes darting from side to side, where he lest it come back to finish what it had started over 15 years ago. As I said, he was 8 at the time, and he recalled that it was 2:37 in the morning, a time he will never forget. He woke up, feeling the need to utilize the bathroom just down the hall. He rose from his bed, tiptoeing on the wooden floors en route to the bathroom, when he heard something from the stairs, which lie just past the bathroom. It moved slowly, and it sounded as if it were on all fours. But Kasky didn't have a dog. He froze in fear, unable to make a break for the bathroom or return to his room, so he stood silently as the sound of paws echoed up the stairs. It eventually reached the top, and what Kasky faced brought sweat to his brow and set shivers down his spine to this day. He described it as having the body of a dog, a very large, hairless dog, standing about 3.5 feet tall on all fours. Its head was not the head of a dog. Rather, it had a somewhat human appearance, but it was flipped upside down, and it had the teeth of an angler fish. Its eyes were to black pits, which seemed to choke out surrounding light, but there was a faint shimmer in the middle of each, as if looking into a long tunnel. Its nose were mere slits, and its nails seemed more like talons, scratching the hardwood as it walked. He and it stared at each other for only a moment before Kasky turned and ran into his room, slamming the door shut and hiding under the blanket. But it didn't give up so easily. The sound of the door creaking open was the only sign Kasky received that the beast had followed him. He slowly peeked out from under his covers, only to find it sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him with its pitch-black eyes. Suddenly it jumped up, grabbing the boy by his foot and dragging him into the middle of the room, slinging him about before Kasky blacked out. He awoke the next morning, deep bite marks marking his legs, covered in scratches and bruises. He told his mother, but she thought he'd been attacked by some dog the previous day, or another child had beat him up. Regardless, he never spoke of it again, except to us, of course. We sat in silence for a moment before deciding we were all tired and went to sleep, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. I decided to send my friend Kasky a message over a social networking site, mentioning it not by its nameless identity, but by a name I conjured for it. He told me never to speak of it again, then he immediately blocked me so I couldn't question him further, or he didn't have to have the name stuck in his head. For after this happened, it came for me. It started slowly at first, shadows in the dark, roaming the house, as it may have done with Kasky without him realizing it. But I did. I left the next week after hearing it scratch at my door, which I had locked to prevent its entering. I drove roughly 300 miles to see my girlfriend for a while, staying in a nearby hotel. I thought I was safe here, thought the distance would have made some sort of difference. But one night, by chance, I looked out the hotel window, greeted by it. Now, it wasn't right in the window, but I was up 3 stories and had a clear view of my car and the 3.5-foot tall dog shadow circling it, scratching at the car door. I watched it for a while, frozen with fear, then moved away from the window lest it saw me and knew my location. I would have written it off as a normal dog, except it kept coming back, circling my car night after night. After I returned home, I immediately moved out of my house and into an apartment, thinking that it may be thrown off by the smell of other people, and that's why it goes for my scent on the car rather than me. So far it's worked. I haven't had the beast in my living area since, but every night, when almost nobody is awake, it returns to my vehicle, scratching, searching for me, and I fear one day will follow my scent up to the 4th floor into my apartment and visit the man who gave it power over himself with something as simple as a name. Bonus stories. Story 1. The wind whispered a secret. I sat on my balcony, preparing to smoke the last cigarette of the night. It was late and my bones themselves were tired as I snuffed out the cigarette and stood with a stretch. A nose caught my attention. It was so faint that I immediately brushed it off as the wind and continued on to bed. The nose already out of my mind, the next morning I returned to the balcony for more cigarettes and coffee. I watched the world wake up with me, the cars churning through the intersection like ants, the birds making their endless racket, the shadows growing steadily shorter. As I watched and listened, I heard the noise again. For a moment I thought it was the wind, since I could see the palm fronds moving across the road. Squinting and looking down at nothing in particular, I tilted my head to try to hear it better. It wasn't just the wind. There was a voice. I tried to brush it off again and continued about my day, returning to the balcony once in a while for another cigarette. I found myself squinting and tilting my head each time, the world around me forgotten in favor of this whispering wind. I couldn't understand what it was saying. It was a like voice on the television in a room down the hall, stifled by 3 or 4 walls between us. No matter how much the noise around me died down, it was still so quiet. I had another cup of coffee, along with my lunch, another cigarette to smoke, and that damned wind to keep my company as I sat on this damn balcony. I felt strange. I felt almost as though I worked myself, as if I were an actor in a screenplay of my life. I instinctively knew my lines, and every move I had to make. I began to fear that voice and the wind. Dinner, I still sat on the balcony as I ate. I didn't want to eat. I just knew I should. I wasn't even sure what I was eating, but I still ate it out of necessity. I lit my cigarette and listened intently. I would hear what this voice said. I must hear this voice. For an hour I sat still, allowing my cigarette to burn down to my knuckles. I didn't move as I felt it sear my flesh. I would hear this voice. I would hear this voice, and it would tell me its secret. I nodded off. I wasn't aware how long I had slept, but the sky was dark and the street lights lit. As I woke, I had an idea. I would pretend to continue sleeping. I would lull it into the open. The crick in my neck bothered me only slightly as I waited for the wind to tell me what I so desperately wanted to know. From the corner of my eye, I saw the moon rising high in the sky when I finally heard the voice again. It was clearer, no longer 3 or 4 rooms away. It was just on the other side of the wall. I could hear it. I could hear the words. My internal celebration was cut short. However, when I finally heard the secret the wind had been keeping from me, the antipsychotics appear to be working. Dr. Story to the prophecy of Zerah, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the early part of the 20th century, is one of the most important episodes in the field of Bible scholarship. They have been studied and transcribed for decades, so it was quite a shock when an unnoticed Hebrew text was found in the collection. The theology of this text, apart from references to Sheol, the abode of the dead, and the primordial chaos monster Leviathan, is quite unlike anything found in the Qumran community. The Bible, or the ancient Near East as a whole, here is the entirety of the text as translated so far. This is the vision of prophetess Sarah revealed to her in the dark of a dead land and written in the dust of a blind moon. There are things that were tamed in the beginning of the cosmos and chained by the stars, which were placed in a sigil of 5 dimensions in the tongue of a formless race which was ancient. Before the elements, their servants were condemned to the mirrors to serve as reflections until the sigil of stars comes undone. At that time their masters will return, and the one called Leviathan will drown the stars in his Icarus waters. The gods of man will be as mortals, and those who knew life after death will suffer as the living. Blessed are the godless. Blessed are those for whom death is extinction. All the host of heaven and hell will alike be tormented by the returned ones, whose hatred has festered for millions of years as the burning stars chain them beyond the attainable world. The reflections will creep from the mirrors and waters to cackle and sizzle in a tongue without reason, and they will catch mortals and drive them to madness and those will be lucky, for their masters will come and they will not allow the salvation of madness. Time will die before them, and their reign will be timeless. Reason will be slaughtered, and space will be senseless. Black stars will hang in the sky choked in nacres. Waters, the gods of the mortals, will be feeble before them, and no law will be left but the whim of the hateful. The things that were chained when the cosmos were formed, blessed are the dead who know nothing. Blessed are those who did not trust salvation, but had faith in extinction at the dust of the body. These are the only ones who are spared. All of this I, Zara, have seen in the dead land, and inscribed in the dust of a blind moon. It has been revealed to me in Sheol, and been made known to me in the pit, and it has been shown to me that writings from Sheol will be seen in the land of the living as the chain of the stars become weaker, as the sigil comes closer to breaking. It should be noted that the translators make the ridiculous assertion that more writing appeared from the start to the completion of their reconstruction of this text, and indeed that vague impressions of letters have already formed below the last sentence, which now ends at the "this should be," taken as a highly unprofessional attempt at explaining away the slow process of translation. The grisly suicides as of this writing, 2 of the original translation team should likewise be ignored. Story 3, Nightmare Walking. Have you ever had one of those dreams where you dream you're doing something, only to wake up and realize you're almost acting out your dream in real time? The most common instance of this is its completely normal wet dream, though there are many other common instances, especially in sleepwalkers, where you see yourself walking along a path, only to wake up and find yourself actually walking somewhere, and other similar scenarios. I, despite no longer being a sleepwalker, have one such story myself. From my childhood, the year was 1996. I was 5 years old and had recently lost my great-grandmother. I was having these weird ongoing nightmares at the time, where someone would call my name, I'd get up and walk in their direction, only to be brutally murdered in any number of ways. I remember being strangled, stabbed, hung, drawn, and quartered, fed to wild animals, and my personal favorite, being pushed into a wood chipper. Often the voice calling me would be someone I actually knew, whether it be my parents, a friend from school, a teacher, my sister, or Lenny Kravitz asking me, "Are you gonna go my way?" Even at 5, I had an appreciation for good music, but I'm starting to get off track. Anyway, there is one particular nightmare that will forever haunt me. This time, it was my recently deceased great-grandmother calling to me. Wookie, she called. I was a really hairy baby, so that nickname stuck for a while with the grandparents and aunties and uncles. Wookie, come give Nan a hug. I have to go now. I remember getting to my feet and lazily dragging myself out of the room in the direction of her voice. Like I said, my nightmares seemed to have an ongoing theme. So even though I was walking toward my great-grandmother, I was expecting her to transform into a dragon and bite me in half, or for a ninja to leap from behind a wall and put countless shurikens into my skin, or even a tank just to drive through the wall next to me and crush me under its treads. I usually woke up instantly after dying anyway, so it had stopped being overly threatening. Anyway, I continued to walk down the narrow hallway toward the frail old lady, arms outstretched, when suddenly a loud explosion woke me from my sleep. I woke with a start, standing in the hallway outside of my room, peering into the blackness of the quiet family home. I turned around, stumbling sleepily back into my room, remembering the dream like a far-off memory, and directly in front of me, the window that once sat above my bed sat emptied, shattered, with its glass fragments dug into my mattress, exactly where I would have been had I not been sleepwalking to this day. I don't know what caused the window to shatter, nor how the glass had managed to embed itself so deeply into the bed, nor do I know if my sleepwalking was a lucky coincidence that saved my life, or an intervention from another being. If you're looking for a nice clean ending where everything is wrapped up and explained nicely, I'm sorry to disappoint. I've been searching for the answers too. Regardless, sometimes the things that scare us most are those that we'll never be able to rationally explain. Story 4. Paris. My grandfather's brother lived most of his life in Paris, France. On the few occasions I've met him, it was very clear that he was a disturbed individual with some sort of something bothering him all day and night. I figured he'd had a stroke, or perhaps he was just plain senile. After a few meetings with my grandfather's brother, I became curious. My grandfather hesitated to tell me the story, but I talked him into it. Now it's a well-known fact that beneath Paris, there's over 100 miles of ancient catacombs going deep underground. It's a subterranean labyrinth that many people have explored and got lost in. My grandfather's brother Alex had no plans of exploring the catacombs. He had recently graduated college and was engaged to his future wife. Things were going just swell for him. Alex said that he was off to fetch some food for dinner and decided to try a different path to the store. He took a wrong turn and kept going, and before he knew it, he was lost in Paris. The next part was blurry. He was in a very shady neighborhood with very poor lighting. The last thing he remembers is walking to the side of the road for a smoke. Next thing he knew, he was in total darkness and up to his waist in water. He had fallen into a recently opened hole leading to the catacombs of Paris. He'd noticed the passageways began leading downward, not what he wanted. Eventually he claims to have found a large empty room. He decided to rest there. He couldn't sleep and had lost almost all hope at this point. He was tottering on the edge of passing out, but he heard something. He painfully stood up, held his breath, and listened. He could hear footsteps and heavy breathing, what sounded almost like wheezing. He called out for help, and the footsteps and breathing stopped. The catacombs were deathly silent except for the occasional droplet of water. He stood like that for about an hour, listening for a response. Eventually the footsteps began again, and once again he called out for help. This time he got his answer. A scream rang out that he claimed to be too feminine to be a man and too deep to be a woman. The shriek was loud and lasted a long time. Beneath that he could hear the footsteps with increased intensity. He jolted up and ran away from the yell, blindly struggling through the catacombs. The scream didn't seem to be getting any further, and he kept running for all his life, no matter how much it hurt to do so. Eventually the shriek faded, but the footsteps were as loud as ever. He ran through the catacombs for what he said seemed like hours, and eventually came across a ladder. He climbed the ladder, and from what it sounded like, the mystery thing did not follow. He took out his lighter and shined it down to see what had been chasing him, but it moved away upon seeing the light, and Alex hauled us up the stairs. He found a manhole, but it would not budge. He yelled and banged for a while, and eventually some passers-by heard him, and the police came to his rescue. He was a good 30 miles away from his apartment in a residential part of Paris. Story 5. Left Behind. Barbara was sure the ritual worked. She stood up from the pentagram as 5 wicks slowly swirled their smoke in the room. The weather seemed angry. Lightning flashed and roared through the coastal home, and suddenly the lights went out. Damn the power. Let him come, she thought to herself as she calmly went downstairs in the dark. She prepared some tea on the stove and waited as her chamomile steeped. She again thought about how unfair it had been to take him so soon, only 8 years old. Sure, things hadn't always been easy, but she had put the bottles away. Things would be different now. She heard 3 distinct knocks at the front door. Excitedly, she ran to swing it open, only to find no one there. She left it open as a welcoming invitation. Knocks from the back door drew her to the spot, only to find that doorway empty as well. She left it open, too, mist from the rain collecting on the tile floor. As she was about to take a sip, she felt a presence behind her. He was here. She whirled round to see her boy. His face was obscured by shadows, but his brown shaggy hair and favorite flannel shirt marked him well enough. She ran to hug him and found he was incredibly heavy, much heavier than she remembered him only a few weeks ago. "Hello, Mommy," said Michael. "Oh, my boy, things will be so different, so much happier, now that you're here. I want to play a game, Mommy." Michael interrupted. There was something unnatural in the tone he used for the word. "Why don't you run and hide? I'm going to catch you. This will be a lot of fun. Are you sure you do it?" His voice boomed through the house. Uneasily, she agreed as Michael began to count. She was going to hide in the pantry when she heard a growling noise, like the low rumble of a distant earthquake. She realized it was coming from Michael. As he counted, she realized she may have made a mistake. 15, 14, you better hide better than that, Mommy. Some things are better left as they are, but I'm here. Now his boyish voice became more and more tinged with that horrific, low grumble. The sound of a blade pulled from the kitchen butcher block alerted her ears to danger. Yes, this had been a mistake. Intense claps of thunder blocked further sound as she raced upstairs to the master bedroom and locked the door. Like a child, she cowered in the closet and waited. 10, 9, 8. "I don't know why you'd want me back, Mommy." She heard his words as leaden feet ascended the stairs. "You weren't nice to Michael." 7, 6, 5, 4. She started to cry frantically, curled in the corner of her closet. She was trapped. She felt as if she couldn't breathe as the locked bedroom door easily sprang open. 3, 2. Silence. She listened as the storm calmed outside, and a whisper emanated from directly behind the closet door. "In fact, Mommy, Michael hates you. That's why he left you behind and sent me instead." The door flung open, and a bolt of lightning illuminated rows of jagged, glinting white teeth crowding Michael's mouth like a shark's jaw. The storm subsided. Her tea grew cold. Story 6. Return to sender. Another bouquet of flowers showed up today. That's the 3rd this week. They're beautiful flowers. They really are. Roses and lilac, bursts of color and baby's breath. Lovely arrangements that would make anyone happy to receive. Yet every time they arrive, I can't help but feel a stab of fear. I guess I should explain. This all started back in college when I started dating this guy. We'll call him Mike. He was a nice enough guy. We just weren't really compatible. I don't know. It didn't work out for the same reason a lot of things in college don't work out, and I never would have given it a second thought or even really remember him at all if it weren't for the flowers. The first bouquet showed up the week after our last date, after I texted him to say this isn't working out. They were vibrant blue chrysanthemums and white roses, and they came with no note or explanation. They merely appeared on the welcome mat in front of my apartment door. I waited for him to try and follow up to get back together with me, but he never did. I even texted him to thank him for the flowers, and he insisted he didn't send them, but of course he'd say that. But then, in a few weeks, another bouquet arrived, and then another. And the week after that, a third, and pretty soon the flowers were coming every week. When I moved out of my apartment, they were waiting for me at my new address. When I got a job in a different state, they arrived at my workplace, placed cheerfully on my desk. I called and texted Mike, trying to get him to stop, but I kept getting a message, failed or this number has been disconnected. I guess he changed his number. Maybe he didn't want me calling to harass him. The flowers kept coming, and I started to get creeped out. How did he know where I lived? How did he keep finding me? I changed my phone number. I moved. I became meticulous about hiding my identity online. I called the florists and begged them to put me on a no-deliver list. I even called the police and tried to file a report that I was being stalked. Let me tell you, trying to get the police to do something about a guy delivering you flowers, not an easy task. But nothing I did could keep the flowers from coming. They just kept showing up every week, and then twice a week. For nearly 3 years now, no matter where I live or where I work, somehow the flowers just keep coming. Which brings us to today and the newest bouquet. Usually, when I get them, I'm exasperated or a little uneasy or just plain mad. But lately, I've been getting more and more scared because I was on Facebook the other day, prowling through friends of friends and old classmates, snooping around the way you do when you've had a couple drinks and a free evening, and I found Mike's Facebook page. It was covered in messages of mourning and memorial because Mike's been dead for nearly 3 years. Story 7. The gaunt man. I wake up suddenly in the middle of the night. At first, I'm not sure why, but then that uncomfortable awareness of being watched washes over me. The hairs on the back of my neck prickle, sending an icy shiver down my spine. I roll over and see something that pulls my entire body rigid. My heart pounds fiercely in my chest, and I desperately wish it would stop beating so loudly. A strangled scream tries to slip my throat, but I'm so paralyzed with fear only the smallest cry escapes. Standing in my open doorway is a figure so tall it has to crouch to fit through the frame. Its silhouette looks of a tall, gaunt man, but I know deep down it's not human. I want to scream out to my parents, but my voice doesn't seem to work. The dark figure in the doorway takes a step forward into the shaft of light from the open window in my room as my eyes widen in terror. The creature is covered in what looks like rotting scabbed flesh. Its fingers have long claws, sharper than knives. Its mouth is just a gaping hole in its scabbing face, and where its eyes should be are nothing but empty, rotting sockets. but there is no doubt in my mind it's staring directly at me. I snap my eyes shut as tightly as possible, pleading with myself to wake up from this nightmare. When I finally open my eyes, I see nothing but the door. I feel my blood pumping through my veins. My heart is beating so fast I can hardly hear much else. I start to feel relief, and then I hear it, a scratching on the side of my bed. The sound reminds me of fingernails running down a chalkboard. Prickling fear rises through my body. Too afraid to move, I shift my eyes towards the sound. I see it, crouched by the side of my bed, clawing at the wooden bed frame. It's so close I can see the maggots squirming inside its eye sockets. It slowly starts to rise, towering over me, reaching its clawed fingers for me. I feel a spasm of fear and find my voice as I scream hysterically for my parents. They come rushing to my room and flick the light on. The creature is gone. I tell them the creature was real. It wasn't a dream. They check everywhere. There's nothing in my room. They tell me it was a nightmare, and I start to breathe again. Nothing. There's nothing in my room. My parents still let me sleep with them for the rest of the night. The next morning I wake up, feeling embarrassed over my nightmare. I promise to sleep back in my room and not to worrying my parents again. That night my parents head out, leaving me home alone. I crawl into bed, and before I switch my lamp off, I decide to check under my bed. Relieved, I see nothing. As I start to climb back in bed, I see something that makes my heart skip a beat. Along the side running rang of the bed frame are clawed scratch marks etched into the splintered wood.